Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, April 14th, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, writer from The Nation magazine, Dave Zirin, on the politics of sports. Meanwhile, Joe Biden declares unconditional exit of all U.S. forces from Afghanistan by September 11th, 2021. Curfews imposed in Minneapolis suburbs in the wake of the Daunte Wright killing. Capitol Police had advance warning about the Capitol attack, but apparently were told by their supervisors to hold back and refrain from using most effective methods for stopping said attack. Today saw a historic committee vote on H.R. 40, a reparations bill. It was held in the House today. Meanwhile, Matt Gaetz associate cooperating with DOJ. Let's call this Pizza Gates, folks. Senate to possibly advance a bipartisan anti-Asian hate crime bill. Canada overtakes the U.S. in new COVID cases for the first time. Legislation to regulate PFAS, those forever chemicals in our drinking water, has been reintroduced in the House and may have an opportunity to pass this time in the Senate. Joe Biden will advance a Trump-era sale of F-35s and drones to the UAE. And lastly, according to the head of the IRS, tax cheats cost us $1 trillion per year. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. Joining me and all of us, as always, Emma Vigeland. Emma, hello. How are you?
Hello. I am doing well, Sam. How are you?
I am doing well. Hanging in there, dealing with like this weird thing that's happening with my hair today.
Well, you put too much coconut oil in it.
I think that's we could debate about that later. That's that's I don't know.
Happened.
Yeah, something happened to it. Something
I know a
happened
little bit
it.
about it.
A couple of things I wanted to just know. First off, I should say credit where credit's due. The Pizza Gates moniker I got from the blog Eschaton. That's Atrios over there. People should be reading that blog on a daily basis. And we should also say that story about the IRS, and we're going to talk about this in the fun half of the program, but the story about the IRS chief testifying yesterday, I think it was, in the Senate, that we as a country are losing $1 trillion a year. It's an estimate, but he laid out the reasons for that estimate, the basis of it. I'm not one of those people who are terribly worried about the deficit or the debt. There's very little reason to believe that the deficit or debt has really any bearing on our economic activity. Inflation is possible, but then you tax. But in an era where we still have Democrats, and I guess Republicans to some extent, who are constantly obsessing about the idea of paying for, how are we going to pay for this? Well, there's $1 trillion sitting there on the table. For people who have their taxes automatically deducted, if you're a wage earner, the rate in which those taxes are paid relative to unpaid taxes is something like 99%. For people who, for really essentially the very wealthy, who make their money through capital gains or through pass-through corporations, the IRS estimates that there's 20% that go unpaid taxes. Here is a clip of that moment in the Senate yesterday. I think it's important to highlight this. This is clip number 11, I believe it is. This is the IRS commissioner in the Senate Finance Committee.
Published tax gap estimate of the Internal Revenue Service, the current one that's out, and we'll be issuing one next year, but the published tax gap estimate is for tax years 2011 to 2013, has a gross tax gap of $441 billion. As you indicated, Mr. Chair, in 2011, folks were generally unaware of the term cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and all. There's more than 8,600 cryptocurrencies, virtual currencies in the marketplace, and the market cap worldwide for cryptocurrencies is almost $2 trillion. Our tax gap map for 2011 to 2013 is based on information that is from 2011 to 2013. It does not include any focus with respect to virtual currencies, which I indicated now is about a $2 trillion market cap. It does not include much information with respect to foreign source income. It does not include information with respect to illegal source income, which is still taxable and we do chase. And it also, more recently, within the last 2 weeks, there was a report published that included 2 IRS researchers from our RAS organization that indicated that the top 1% of all taxpayers by high income account for as much as an additional $175 billion in the tax gap computations. And that's associated with their look at only 2 issues, which were pass-through entities and offshore income associated with the top 1%. If you aggregate the points that I'm talking about and you look at the fact that there's a current estimate by folks on the outside that the tax gap is $7.5 trillion over the next 10 years, and you add in the component pieces that I've referenced, there are more. I've just referenced the ones that are most highly visible at this point. If you add those in, I think it would not be outlandish to believe that the actual tax gap could approach and possibly exceed $1 trillion per year.
So that's like more than double what the official estimate was. Is that correct?
Well, he's adding up all these things. I mean, that is, I believe it is. But the bottom line is there's a tremendous amount of money sitting on the table. And we have cut over the past 10 years, 17,000 enforcement-related employees. 17,000. And we have known for certainly as long as I've been talking into a microphone about politics, that for every dollar you spend on the IRS budget in terms of enforcement, you get 4 in return. There is, I guess maybe short of Bitcoin at this point, there is no better return on investment. Certainly not for the U.S. government, but even in any area. 99% of taxes are paid to the IRS when there is automatic withholding and reporting to the agency, but only 45%. Only 45% of what's owed gets paid when those do not exist, when there is not automatic withholding and automatic reporting. I mean,
It's
that's
almost
just
like the government works when they actually choose to enforce these things.
well, I mean, the problem is that we don't the amount of money that you need to spend to come chasing this. You need some money, but we have had at the very least the Republican Party and to some extent the Democratic Party have systemically defunded the IRS, and the benefits have all accrued to those people essentially. Well, certainly the top 1%, but I would just say broadly speaking, rich people in general in this country.
And Redding hinted at there the next frontier of tax dodging, which is crypto.
Exactly.
So, I mean, Rob Portman apparently going to introduce some sort of legislation in the Senate to combat this. I find it dubious as to whether that will go anywhere if the filibuster remains in place, but at least he can signal, and crypto's more for young tech bros. So, but that is, I mean, the word's going to spread. This is going to be a way for rich people to hide their money.
It's going to be interesting too. If I would be curious as to how the president parliamentarian would rule on such a thing. I mean, if you have the IRS saying, look, we can't give you specific numbers, but we can give you broad estimates as to how much we are losing in tax revenue because of essentially the regulations around cryptocurrency. One could argue that this has a direct impact on the budget of the United States. And so that would be interesting to see if that's something that could be rolled into reconciliation.
I registered president parliamentarian like 5 seconds too late, but good. I mean, you stole my joke, but good.
That's all right. That's all right. That's no problem.
Yeah,
I mean, I put it in the footnotes of the show.
Yeah.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Dave Zirin. He is the host of the podcast Edge of Sports. He's also the Nation Magazine's sports editor, author of the upcoming book, The Kaepernick Effect, Taking a Knee, Changing the World. Take a quick break. We'll be right back. And, one of today's sponsors also happened to sponsor my breakfast this morning. Well, actually, they didn't really technically sponsor it. They provided it. I went on a binge. Did you see I bought like 8 boxes of the cinnamon in the office. I don't know.
I saw, that's been my go-to at my place. So I can't snack on the cinnamon here when I have it for breakfast. I'll overdo it. I don't want to.
Are you now eating the cinnamon?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were more like, I can't remember what flavor you had.
I like frosted, I like peanut butter, I like fruity, and I like the cinnamon. So I got all 4.
We should probably say what the name of the product is. Of course, we're talking about Magic Spoon. Magic Spoon has the flavors that you love, but here's the good part. Well, here's the other good part. It's without all the bad stuff. You don't have to give up eating cereal to be healthier. Zero sugar. 13 to 14 grams protein, only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving, only 140 calories a serving. It's keto friendly, it's gluten free, it's grain free, it's soy free, it's low carb, and it's GMO free. And here's exciting news for you blueberry lovers. Magic Spoon is relaunching the blueberry flavor. It's one of your favorite flavors, back in stock now after being sold out. Or here's what you could do. You could build your own box. Available flavors to build your very own custom bundle are cocoa, fruity, frosted, peanut butter, and cinnamon. I think they have a couple of new flavors as well. I think I saw peanut butter and jelly, which sounded pretty interesting to me. But I mean, here's the bottom line. The cereal is fantastic, and it doesn't have that crap in it. Not only is it healthier for you as an adult, but the thing I also love about it, my kids love it. I had to stock up on the cookies and cream. I think that was one of their, they rotate the flavors through. And Saul loves that cookies and cream, but he's also a big fruity fan. So I keep both in the house. And it is a pleasure to be able to get your kid to eat something that's not full of sugar. And of course, I eat it really largely throughout the morning. I have maybe a bowl in the morning, or sometimes I just graze on it when I'm at work. You can too. You will not be disappointed. You go to magicspoon.com/majority report to grab some blueberry or a custom bundle of cereal to try it today. And be sure to use our promo code majority report at checkout to save $5 off your order. This offer is now good anywhere in the US or Canada, but only when you use our code at checkout. Majority report. Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money. Remember, get your next delicious bowl of guilt-free cereal at magicspoon.com/majority report. Use the code majority report to save $5 off. Folks, Mother's Day is coming up. Now, I know this is going to sound a little weird, but I have a very, very unique idea for what you could give as a gift this year. Emma, think about it. You're looking for the perfect Mother's Day gift. You ready? A bidet. Yes, a bidet from Hello Tushy. You can bring your mom into the future with a brand new Hello Tushy 3.0 modern bidet attachment. Come on, I mean, look, first of all, it's stylish. It's eco-friendly, super easy to install, will help stop flushing, your folks' retirement down the toilet and toilet paper expenses. Hello Tushy 3.0 doesn't just cleanse your butt with a precise stream of fresh water. It cleans itself before and after it's used with the Smart Spray automatic cleaning nozzle. When they say anyone can put this together, they mean even your parents. It's super easy. It attaches to your existing toilet. It requires no electricity, no additional plumbing, no tech support, no FaceTime, none of that. Plus, every Hello Tushy bidet attachment comes with a 60-day risk-free guarantee and a 12-month warranty. If your mom already has a Hello Tushy, you can upgrade to the 3.0.
You're not washing your butt enough.
Well, I mean,
It's an
honestly,
upgrade.
it is not, I will say this, it is not the traditional Mother's Day gift, but I'm telling you, it is never too late to revolutionize your life. And this is the way that, it happens. Trust me, folks. It is a revelation. It makes so much more sense. It's just that we grew up without it. And there you go. This would be a great gift. Your mom would have never, ever contemplated a gift like this. And then, of course, it's also the gift, for really the rest of the family, too. You can give a gift of a clean butt right now by going to hellotushy.com/majority. You get 10% off plus free shipping. Special offer for our listeners, hellotushy.com/majority for 10% off. hellotushy.com/majority. All right. I want to welcome back to the program one of my favorite guests. He is the host of the podcast Edge of Sports. He is the Nation's magazine sports editor. He is the author of the upcoming book, The Kaepernick Effect, Taking a Knee, Changing the World. Dave Zirin, I'm here with Emma Vigeland. How are you? Thanks for coming.
Hey, doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
You got a Tenacious D shirt on. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
The Mighty Mighty D. I've seen them live probably more than any other band.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Which is actually much cooler than it sounds, I swear.
No, I mean, they're cool. Like, Jack Black, he's aged well in terms of just his contributions to society, in my view.
Oh, I remember seeing those guys when they got together back in the day, way back, before they started touring. Anyways, Dave, that's not what we're here for, but we can catch up on that. I want to talk about, there's a bunch of stuff I want to talk about. I want to talk about the piece that you wrote, relative to MLB leaving, for their the All-Star game and the cancellation of the Twins game the other night. We're going to talk about the Olympics and what's happening with the NCAA at the Supreme Court. And but let's start with the reason why I grouped together the baseball and what happened at the Twins is you made the point that Major League Baseball, these teams have a relationship to the community. and they're getting involved in politics in some level is like, it feels a little bit different than typical corporate structure.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I mean, we have to look at sports history during times where there have been crises like this. Like in 1992, you had the LA rebellion after the officers were acquitted in the beating of Rodney King. You didn't see any teams do anything. You didn't see any athletes say anything. And that is the norm when you have these crises in different cities. In 1968, after the riots, when Dr. King was assassinated, you had teams actually, like, the most they did was get on the radio, players, and say, "People, please return to your homes." So actually acting as an agent to try to calm people down, not try to organize people, not try to get their voices heard. And I think we are living in a profoundly different moment at this moment, where teams feel like they are not only a part of their community, but if teams don't get out front and say things, then their players will. And their players will then put teams in the position of, and when I say teams, I'm really saying executives, franchise owners.
Right.
They're operating from the rear, and they don't want to do that at this point. I think all these teams were caught flat-footed last August after the police shooting of Jacob Blake, when athletes in the NBA, WNBA, Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, when they all made the move to withdraw their labor and say, we're not going to play. And the teams were sort of caught flat-footed at that moment. And I think teams now are determined to be out front and say, you know what, we stand with our players, we stand with the community, and we understand that this isn't a moment where we could just do games as usual.
I mean, it is sort of fascinating to me, the idea that the players are now leveraging their power as labor with management, and then management, because there's a different relationship than, I mean, look, ultimately these guys are just, they're trying to suck up as much dollars as they can, and they're willing to sort of chew up stuff in the way, but because the players are leveraging their power here, the relationship that these owners have to a specific community, you can actually see. It seems to me to be possible on some level that, like, Minnesota Twins could influence, what Minneapolis does in terms of what's in the portfolio of police there.
Oh, absolutely. The impact is strong. And, we could talk about and tease out the reasons for this. I mean, baseball, the average age of the baseball fan is 57. And they live in this existential fear that in 20, 30 years, baseball is going to be a minor sport on the landscape. So they're trying to get an audience that's under 20 years old. And then they have asked themselves, what does this young generation want? And they understand. I've interviewed some of these folks who are trying to do this marketing to younger fans. They understand that this fan base is more demographically diverse than any generational fan base in this country's history, and they're more intolerant of intolerance than any generation in the history of this country. And they need to figure out how this young fan base, a fan base that, by the way, people are competing for their eyeballs across social media, across 1,000 channels, across 1,000 streaming services. How do we connect and get their eyeballs? And they understand that if they don't have some semblance of a social conscience, or even worse, if they're seen as being prehistoric, Neanderthal, antediluvian, in other words, if they resemble Brian Kemp, they know that they're going to have no kind of an audience coming up in that younger generation. So it's connected with the power of players, their desire to get a new audience, and the desire of their own sponsors. And we've seen this across the landscape since the police murder of George Floyd, their own sponsors who also want to look like they are on the side of social justice and not on the side of the people doing the killing.
Can you talk about how, it's like I think about back in history about notable athlete activists like Muhammad Ali or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but for every one of those there were hundreds more of, like, O.J. Simpson. He was a star, but he was notably very anti-political and and was a favorable person to corporate America, etc. Like, there was no institutional support behind these aberrations of players who were talented enough to speak out and not fear retribution by the team or lose sponsorships and still have wealth. They were only able to leverage their power based on their star power, but even most stars, they didn't speak out at all. Then I see the post Kaepernick era, and then there's the post George Floyd era where it took another step. Are those notable benchmarks in how players have begun to leverage their power? Because that, to me, those seem like good ways to look at it.
I'm smiling a little bit when you ask the question, not just because it's a very, very good question. That doesn't cause me to smile because that's expected. What's making me smile is thinking about the journey that Colin Kaepernick has taken, and that he's somebody who's been exiled from his sport, and yet we see it as a step forward for the empowerment of athletes. And it's worth teasing that out for a second. Like, how is it somebody who is ruthlessly punished for daring to stand up, how is that somehow improved the political and power position of athletes themselves? And I think it's simply because that you've had this mass movement surround what Kaepernick did, of what's happening off the field and off the court, that has somehow burnished his reputation to the point where they have been unable to bury him. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Mass marches in the street, the power of social media, and athletes being able to be heard around the media and around the institutional structures of their team itself. But I think what's also so important about 2021 is we have to remember that Kaepernick took his knee almost 5 years ago. And so this young generation of athletes, whether they're in college, and I know we're going to talk about the NCAA, or whether they're in their early 20s, they have grown up basically from ages like 16 to 21, thinking of Colin Kaepernick as a hero, thinking that he was correct, thinking that what he did was brave, and thinking that they need to find themselves in a position where they're building on his sacrifice. So I think that was a huge benchmark. And you saw that reflect itself in the George Floyd protests as well, because you saw so many people, I think, taking a knee during the protests. You saw in some cities, police officers taking a knee to show that they were on the side of the protesters. And I think a lot of that is very performative.
Right.
To put it mildly, but it shows like the power of what he did. You even had Roger Goodell say, "We owe Colin Kaepernick a debt of gratitude." I mean, it's unbelievable that they're this shameless, but it shows the vindication and the power of social movements, because that's what's the difference between a Colin Kaepernick and, say, a Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, who in 1996 didn't come out for the anthem to protest U.S. foreign policy and got buried for it. He became a ghost story by which people would say to new generations of players, hey, you don't want to end up like Mahmoud Abdul Rauf. And I think that's what they wanted for Colin Kaepernick, to be able to say to this new generation of players, don't be like him or you'll find yourself out of the league, when instead he's become kind of an animating spirit for this young generation of players.
So let me just get back a little bit to so the players are able to leverage this with their owners. Is there any mechanism that the players have? Because look, they're players. It's not, they're not politicians. They don't have time to sit down and, work this stuff out and sort of measure. But is there any type of are they contemplating, I don't know if it's through the union or whatever, some type of institutional support? Because, there are some people who say that MLB should not have left Atlanta, that the wrong people are being hurt by this. In Atlanta, I don't know how to assess that necessarily, but instead what the players should do is demand all of the owners, you stop contributing to Brian Kemp. You stop contributing to any of these legislatures in Atlanta, in Georgia, or whatever. I mean, is there a mechanism where the players can hold the owners to account in some way other than just, hey, I took a knee at my corporate party, and so we're good,
I mean, I think that you mentioned the unions. It's hard to see the unions institutionally holding ownership's feet to the fire in terms of donations to political parties and the like. I think it's going to have to be players organizing themselves independently of the union, because I don't see the union structured to go after the owners politically at this time. I mean, maybe that could change, but that would have to mean some serious rank and file organizing on behalf of the players themselves, because institutionally, bureaucratically, the unions are just not set up for it. I think it's the power of naming and shaming that the players have. Like, for them to look at, say, an owner of the Detroit Pistons, for example, who's making his money through investing in the criminal justice system in terms of like the phones. And this has been a big controversy up in Detroit. Like he just bleeds out people who are behind bars through their phone calls. And for them to be able to say to him, how can you have Black Lives Matter on the court? And at the same time, his name is Tom Goris. And they're saying, like, how can you have Black Lives Matter on the court while at the same time I have this parasitic position where you're getting money every time someone makes a phone call from a prison? Like there's a gap there. And I think by naming and shaming that, and by talking about the gap between some of the performative activism and then actually putting some teeth in it, I think that's going to be where you see the change. Now, how it organizes itself institutionally, well, they have a social justice committee in the NBA that came out of the players' strikes last August. There are some organizations of players in the NFL, but those institutions are going to have to become a lot stronger if they're going to be able to go after ownership, like on that level of politics. But already we're seeing progress. Like I think the Minnesota teams actually canceling the games shows that they realize they can't just put out statements anymore. It can't just be performative. It can't just be, look at us, we just put end racism in the outfield or whatever. They're showing that like, no, there are actually times where the games have to stop. And I thought it was a stirring moment and a stirring statement. And now players can take it to that next level, not to mention fans, to say, okay, you're going to cancel the games. What about canceling your contributions to some of these politicians?
Well, you talk about the strength of the institutions, right? The MLB doing this is different than the NBA doing this, right? Yeah. So say the NBA had the All-Star game in Atlanta. That would probably be a gimme because the NBA's of the big four leagues in this country, more progressive. MLB is kind of an old school institution. And so are the players even, because, you're talking about the strength of players unions. To me, from the outside looking in and just being a fan of sports, what has always sapped some of these players unions from the real power that they hold is the fact that these careers are so finite. Exactly. And so they don't necessarily, they can't hold the picket line in the same way other unions may be able to, because they're like, I have to capitalize on this maybe 4-year career, make as much money as I possibly can. I can't afford to take a year off, do a labor stoppage, etc. Like, what is the difference in terms of the leagues that you're seeing, around the country, the institutional pushback by, say, the MLB versus the NBA, and then how the strength of these unions relate to those institutions?
Well, it's interesting. I think the unions are playing catch up because the MLB, one of the main reasons why they moved the All-Star game from Georgia to Denver, there are a lot of reasons. We've already talked about some of them, corporate pressure and the like. But one of the big reasons was about what happened last August and players expressing their labor power by refusing to play. And I think that's something that was a buildup that was just beginning before MLB said they were going to move the game out of Georgia, of players, managers, the union speaking out and saying boycott is on the table for this particular game. And so Major League Baseball, what they did was actually head off a boycott, I would argue, by moving it to Denver. So people who say, oh, losing so much money, it's like, how much money would have been lost if the game basically had to be canceled? Or if they were working with third-tier all-stars and all the like of it, or just finding anybody who would be willing to scab on the game if players were willing to boycott. So I think what players have done is actually frighten ownership. The events of last August haven't been discussed nearly enough because you haven't seen, like, for the reasons you said, you haven't seen strikes in recent years. And one of those reasons is, the number one reason is what you said, the length of playing careers. The other reason is that salaries are flush. I mean, players are doing well, even though there's fear about the future financial viability of some of these sports leagues because of an aging fan base. They also have locked in these huge television deals. So financially, that's good. But then if you have players expressing themselves as workers on social justice questions, I mean, striking against racism, striking for Black lives, I think that's what these main sports leagues, especially as fans are going back in the stadiums, are trying to figure out how they can work with and how they can navigate this new world with the players and not in opposition to the players. Now, is that something that's going to keep going? I don't know.
Let me just ask one more second. This is breaking now. Officer Kim Potter will be charged with second-degree manslaughter for the killing of Dante Wright. Maximum penalty is 10 years and or fine. When we talk about these different leagues, and I know Emma's going to move to the NCAA in a second, but is baseball of the four big sports like maybe not? I mean, as I say it, but where are they positioned relative to the speaking to that younger audience? Relative to, let's say, I mean, obviously NBA, is far more in touch, I think, with young people. But I mean, I'm coaching my kids' minor league, pony league team, and I can see the level of interest is not what it was when I was a kid. I mean, it's slower. The game is slow for them.
Mm-hmm. And it's slower than it was a generation ago. I mean, I just interviewed Dave Parker, one of my heroes growing up, great Pittsburgh Pirate, the Cobra, Dave Parker. And he's told me that he has trouble watching the game that he grew up loving, that made him famous. He just wrote a book about his life, and he has trouble watching games in 2021. They're longer than they were a generation ago. And right now, Theo Epstein, one of the smartest baseball minds, arguably ever, this is his full-time job, is trying to figure out how to market the game to younger fans, how to make the game shorter, how to make sure it's not 4 hours long, how to make sure that people like my son, who loves to play baseball but doesn't love to watch baseball, how do you bridge that gap where they actually want to watch the game? Because at times it can feel unwatchable. And I think baseball has always been very conservative when it comes to figuring out how to change their sport. They're very conservative in general, institutionally, which is what made them moving the All-Star game, I would argue, such a crisis for the GOP. Like this idea of they've tried to paint Major League Baseball as if it's controlled by a quote unquote woke mob. The GOP's Twitter feed put out something that implied strongly that baseball was in a communist conspiracy with China and Cuba. And that dog.
But not the PGA Tour. But not the PGA Tour. They're still good American, red-blooded Americans.
For the GOP.
Yeah.
They've got the PGA Tour and attacking trans kids and stopping people from voting. That's the big three plank of what they're standing on right now. And they're adrift because of it. And I think the idea that they're losing baseball, it presents a social crisis for the GOP for the simple reason that, like, what is so noxious about them that even an institution this conservative is saying, yeah, we want no part with what you're doing to the country.
So much of what surrounds conversations about race in sports, is indelibly connected to their labor and labor rights. And, that's what we're seeing with the NCAA on a, I think, even much more exploitative level, because at least the players in these leagues are getting paid and they can, in good faith, negotiate with the league that employs them. The NCAA, we've talked about this, Dave, before, but they, in my view, engage in incredibly exploitative practices as they rake in hundreds of millions of dollars, and their coaches get paid millions of dollars for football, basketball. March Madness just happened. That rakes in millions upon millions for TV networks and for the universities. Players get $0. And now the Supreme Court is taking up this case as a labor issue. The NCAA is trying to argue that this is an amateur sport, and so it should be treated as such. But the fact that the coaches get paid millions of dollars kind of flies in the face of the amateurishness, right? It should be just the mechanic coming off the road and then in his spare time coaching the football team. But I digress. What is your sense of how this fight with the Supreme Court is playing out?
Oh, I mean, I followed it very closely, and what was so striking was that even the right-wing rump of the court, we're talking Thomas, Kavanaugh, Alito, they looked at what the NCAA was arguing and they recoiled, which is not an uncommon thing that I've seen. Like, people who are on the right who just don't know how the business operates and don't realize how, frankly, how it's this unconstitutional labor space that's been carved out just for these so-called quote unquote student athletes, that they look at it and they're in shock that such a situation exists where coaches make millions of dollars, players make bupkis. And I think they received quite a shock to see no defenders on the Supreme Court, and particularly this right-wing edge of the Supreme Court saying, yeah, this doesn't seem like a fair labor practice at all. And asking questions that you and I have been talking about for a long time, and that long-time watchers have been saying for decades and decades. Like, they're acting like this is the first time they've ever thought of it, where they say things like, well, what happens? Where's the education come in? Like, why? Like, this is the questions the Supreme Court justices were asking. Like, why can't they take the classes that they want to take? Are they really getting an education for what they do on the sporting field? And so I think if I'm the NCAA, I'm feeling more pressured than ever, and more thinking more and more that their time operating in this certain business practice is over. And they've been corrupted by the sheer billions that have come into the sport. A statistic I always throw at people that I think is great for bar conversations is, Dabo Swinney, coach at Clemson, makes $10 million a year with bonuses, coaching at Clemson. Danny Ford wins the national championship for Clemson in football in 1981. He made 50 grand. So how does a job that pays 50 grand in 1981 pay $10 million in 2021? That's about a change in the very basis of the sport. The very economic base has been utterly flush with money, and it's raised questions for the athletes themselves when they see assistant coaches making millions of dollars a year.
And they could blow out their knee, and they could never see professional success and never make any money, and their jersey number could still be sold, and they're not making money off of that either. I mean, without their name on the back, I guess, by the university. But still, I mean, Sam, I'll let you go. But I want to get into how indelibly the old Southern racism component plays into this. But Sam, you can go ahead.
Well, I'm just curious as to what the answer is. I mean, obviously one answer is they need to be paid commensurate with, there needs to be, they need to be paid because what they're doing is not fundamentally is not amateur sports. But the other, solution, it seems to me, is to go back to that era where the head coach gets $50,000, right? Like, I don't know if it's possible to turn the clock back like that, but, and maybe, it's just, it seems the whole thing seems like even paying them, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't be paid, but like the idea of colleges having this sort of like cottage industry, which is really not really a cottage industry in some of these places, right? It's almost like the college is built around, we have people go to classes so that we can actually justify having the football team and generate this revenue. Like, maybe there should be like, or is it that you make it so onerous to pay the athletes that there needs to be some type of like relationship between the profits generated and what is paid to the student athletes, so that there's a rebalancing of what the whole enterprise is about?
Yeah, there are a couple of things in what you said. Like, I don't know if we can turn back on what the coaches are getting paid, precisely because so many these contracts are signed for the next 10, 20 years, and they amount to billions and billions of dollars. So all we can really play with realistically is how that money gets allocated. And a lot of these coaches are under contract. So thinking about how to make sure the players are able to get a piece of the pie of something like an $8.8 billion NCAA contract, for example, I think is the only tangible way forward. Because if I had a magic wand, what I would do is just de-link our system of higher education from minor league sports altogether. Get the NBA to pay for its own minor league, which they're starting to take steps towards doing. Get the NFL to pay for its own training system to get this generation of players who are good enough to play, who want to play, sign them up. That's what other sports do. And it's no coincidence to me, and this goes to what Emma was inferring a couple minutes ago. It's no coincidence to me that the sports that depend on the universities to provide this kind of free labor and free training, these are the sports that center Black American athletes, football and basketball, because they're the most disempowered coming up through the youth sports system, so they're most easy to exploit. and that they're done through our university system is kind of disgusting. And that sports have become like a neoliberal tentpole of the entire economics of not just the universities, but these small university towns, right. South Bend, Indiana, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I mean, South Bend, where Notre Dame is, a century ago, Notre Dame's a small private college that has a cool football team, and it's a textile community. That's 100 years ago. 100 years in the future, it's basically, it's not just a college town, it's a Notre Dame football town. And if the team does well, then the town does well. And if the team doesn't do well, then all the industries, like from hotel, service industries, they suffer. That is not a good way to operate. And that also answers the question, though, about why football players at the start of this horrific pandemic were deemed essential workers. Because they were while students are staying home doing the work, the players are putting themselves at terrible risk of what at the time was a pandemic we knew very, very little about. And they were being put to work. That's a problem.
Yeah. And I think, part of this too is that the NFL and the NBA are complicit in this exploitation. And the dirty secret is that the NBA and the NFL unions are complicit in a little of this exploitation in many ways, because they uphold these contracts between the league and the universities and the NCAA that says, if you want to come to the NFL, you've got to play 3 years of college football. You're not going to get paid. Mm-hmm. You could ruin your knee. You could blow out. You can make millions for the university. You could be a star player. And the families that have been betting on you, say a lot of these kids come from poor backgrounds, and they're banking on making millions of dollars in the league for a short period of time in order to help out their families. You'll never see that. And what's your take on that? I could rant about that forever, but because of that contract between the NCAA and the major leagues, this is why the system of exploitation and racism is still in place.
But the hidden joy in all of that, like a lot of dirty secrets, but there's a hidden joy in there, and that's that these players are really disempowered, but they also have a tremendous amount of power at the same time. They're disempowered because they don't have a union, they have no way to collectively bargain their health, they have no way to even collectively complain about their situation without risking losing their scholarship. But they also have so much power in that if they chose to withdraw their labor, say before the Final Four, they would be able to rewrite their relationship with power and with money with a snap of the fingers. And we've seen inklings of this in recent years. And there were even rumors going into this year's Final Four that players were going to refuse to come out and play unless certain changes were made in the structure. It didn't happen, unfortunately. But I've never heard the rumors so live as I did this year, as players are doing hashtag no NCAA property and putting out, using social media to shine the truth on what was going on. Because, injustice thrives in shadows. And the best thing about social media, and there's so much awful about it, but the best thing about it is that you can shine light on whatever you want to shine light upon. And a lot of players have been taking advantage of that in recent years, oftentimes defying the social media rules that are set down by coaches, which can be ridiculously dictatorial.
I for one would love to see that development where there's minor leagues for football and for, I don't know how what the future of football should really be, frankly, but these minor leagues for basketball, so that this onus, so that you're able to sort of like de-emphasize these sports programs in the context of these colleges. It just doesn't seem.
It's become a religion, though, for town, Sam. It's just not a realistic way to go.
I know that. It's so disturbing, the idea that the fortunes of these towns are so intertwined with a multi-million dollar football program. Is just sort of disturbing, I think, on some level. But
then you get these incredibly bizarre scenes, like last summer. After the killing of George Floyd, you see a march in Tuscaloosa, Alabama of the football players. You see a march at the University of Mississippi of the football players, where they're joined by their white coaches to march in the town against racism and police brutality. Now, have these coaches all of a sudden become born-again social justice activists? Not at all. But they understand that their players have so much power in these communities. And the fact that they're small towns actually gives the players more leverage than if, say, the big college programs were in like Philadelphia, New York City. It gives them a degree of leverage that I think over the next few years, we're going to see them leverage even more.
All right. I want to turn to the Olympics. I think probably everything I learned or the vast majority of what I learned that's bad about the Olympics, I did by reading your book on the Rio Games, and we spoke about Sochi, and this came up, and I know I want to talk about Echo Park and what that says about the LA Games, but first, it came up a couple of weeks ago, and someone was like, they're going to play the Tokyo Olympics, but there's going to be no fans that are going to be there. And I mean, give me your perspective on that, because I was like, oh, wait, is that good? Because I like the games. I just don't like what the games as an institution, what they do to those cities that they're in. And I would imagine a big part of that is because they're basically using this as a one-off, major tourist attraction that is functioning at the same way as almost like disaster capitalism does. Yeah. It's just, a shock to the system. We come in and this is the way we're going to sort of reorient things. Give me your take on the Tokyo, and then we'll talk about LA.
That's a sporting shock doctrine. Over 70% of the people of Tokyo don't want the Olympics there. They think it's going to be a super spreader event, that the vaccination rate is incredibly low in Tokyo and in Japan as a whole. They've done an amazing job controlling the pandemic because of people willing to wear masks. But as far as vaccinations, terrible. And they don't want the games, because where the games go, you get debt displacement and the militarization of public space. And I was in Tokyo right before everything shut down because of COVID, and you saw it there. You saw those fears. I spoke to people who had been pushed out of their homes. I spoke to this one family that was thrown out of their homes for these Olympics, and they also had been thrown out of their homes in 1964 for the last Tokyo Olympics. So this is a family. So I'm speaking to this woman with of course, a translator, this woman in her 70s who's talking to me about being thrown out of her home as a small child, and then again, being thrown out of her home for these Olympics as well. So people in Tokyo are not happy. There were protests when I was there, but the Olympics, they feel like they're too big to fail. And they feel like they've got billions of dollars. The Japanese government has invested billions of dollars. And so the show must go on because they have to satisfy NBC. They have to satisfy the television rights for this. And if they get the games on television, it doesn't really matter if fans go or not.
Right. That's where all the revenue is generated. What of the idea of, and we should talk about LA, but the story is the same, isn't it? I mean, in every place it is. Yeah. It is how we're going to dispossess people of their homes, and we're going to sort of subsume public property and make it private. And it's really just like, this is our urban renewal project, but it's for just wealthy people essentially going forward. How's that playing out in LA?
Well, just one last thing about how it's playing out in Tokyo is that they've themed it as the recovery games and using Fukushima as a backdrop, where they're going to be doing the running of the torch through Fukushima, where there was, of course, natural disasters that led to a brutal nuclear fallout. I visited Fukushima. I visited it with scientists who had those machines whose names I'm forgetting that detect how much nuclear waste is in the area. I mean, it's still a nuclearized zone. And they're going to be doing events in Fukushima, all to spread this idea that recovery games, and who knows what the theme is going to be for LA. But I promise you, we're going to be talking about LA for the next 8 years, or 7 years. Not just when the Olympics are about to start in 2028, because there are already huge protests in LA. There are already city council people in LA who are actually pushing back against the logic of Olympism, which means more police. It means more surveillance. LA is already one of the most heavily surveilled cities in the world. LA has a absolutely terrible homelessness problem, which is going to be exacerbated by the Olympics. That's what the Echo Park battle was really about. And that's also why a lot of anti-Olympic activists, they were there in Echo Park defending the unhoused people who were there, precisely because they see the connection between the Olympic buildup, which has already started, and this attack on people who are at the absolute fringes of Los Angeles.
We should just tell people that Echo Park is a neighborhood in LA. There's a park there that had been, I guess, basically rehabbed over the past, I can't remember how many years ago it was. I just did, I read at one point, like they found a car in the pond, a couple of cars in the pond there. It was cleaned up, and it during the course of COVID, it has become basically a small community for unhoused people. And, the different people have different perspectives on, whether that's a good thing or there, but they went in and cleared it, with a lot of police violence, and, with temporary housing for these unhoused people, but it's really just it's not doing anything. I mean, it's just basically just starting. It's like hitting the reset button again, but you're destroying a community that had been keeping people safe. Yeah. In the process. So, and so there's no direct bearing there. It's just, it is similar set of issues.
Yeah, similar set of issues. The big three are debt, displacement, and militarization. And in Echo Park, you see the displacement and you see the militarization, and that's what has people on edge in LA. And you're going to see so much in the next 7 years. You're going to see figures in LA who you've respected in the movies and sports world talk about how great it is that the Olympics are coming. You're going to see protests in the streets by interesting actors, like people you might not necessarily think of as a protesting community, like the unhoused people, for example. You're going to see a lot of that in the next 7 years. And I think we should brace ourselves for it, because I think the veil has really been lifted off of what the Olympics are. This isn't the 1984 Olympics anymore, with Ronald Reagan coming out in Los Angeles and everybody cheering the fact that the Soviets are boycotting the games and Carl Lewis wins 4 gold medals. Like, those days are done. There's so much more dissent now.
Why can't we just find a place where they are permanent? I mean, wouldn't that be the solution here? Yeah. I don't know. There's got to, some, I don't know
some
what country.
plot of land, build it.
Honestly, and that's the permanent Olympic. Is the reason why we don't do that because people think oh, it's not fair? Or is it because this is such a, I don't want to overuse the word, but neoliberal project here, and that there's just too much money. I mean, look, the TV people would still be able to get their pay, would still be able to make their revenue, right? It's just that this is used. Is it just that the people who are in charge of the Olympics use this as a way of enriching certain groups of people, narrow groups of people around the world, and everybody gets a taste? Or, is that why?
I mean, it makes so much more sense. And I've been arguing this for years. You find one consistent location to have the games, no matter where they might be. Call it Greece, why not? And what's good about that is you don't create what are known as white elephants. Those are stadiums that get used once and then are just left to rot. These stadiums, these facilities could actually have use value with every Olympic Games, and you could make sure that they're rebuilt and rebuilt well, and you create jobs that are actually consistent, because you need to keep making sure that upkeep is good. That makes so much more sense than what they do, is creating this kind of travel log as if this is the late 19th century. And we're all supposed to be like, ooh, look at Tokyo, land of magic in the Far East. We don't know what Tokyo looks like. But the reason why they do it is exactly the reason that you're saying. And John Carlos, the 1968 Olympian who raised his fist, he once said to me, the reason why they have the Olympics only every 4 years is that it takes 4 years to count all the money. And that goes to what you're saying, whether you're talking about commercial sponsorship, whether you're talking about the global anti-terror anti-terror weapon industrial complex, which is a real thing, like that these companies that go around the world and they sell themselves to mega events like the Olympics to say, we are the best institution for you to bring in for billions of dollars so we can surveil people. And guess what? You can actually keep the equipment, the closed circuit TVs and the rest of it after the Olympics are done. So when Olympics leave a place, the places themselves are actually less democratic than when they're there in the first place. And what's so ironic is that the Olympics, the IOC, they argue, well, the reason why we have to go to places like Beijing is we make Beijing more democratic. We make Beijing more like the West, when the opposite is the case. They make the West more authoritarian.
Well, Dave Zirin, always a pleasure. Folks, check out Edge of Sports or Dave's writing in The Nation magazine. Can't tell you how much. And looking forward to your book, The Kaepernick Effect, coming out, I think, in the fall, right?
Yep, this September.
Great. All right, Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you both.
All right, quick break. We'll be right back to wrap it up. All right, folks, that's it for us. And so when you see people protesting the Olympics in LA or in Tokyo, for that matter, now you know why, because it is going to lead to a tremendous amount of hardship and displacement for people, and it's going to fundamentally change the structure of the places that you're living to the detriment of a lot of people who live there. And there you have it. That's why you always get a lot of pushback on when people are trying to, win that Olympics lottery. But that's it for us. Emma and I will be back tomorrow, or back now.
Oh, we never left. Back like we never left.
Folks, stick with us for the fun half. Brandon Sutton's going to be joining us today. Just want to remind you, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member today at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you support the free show, and you get a free of commercials. You can check out our sponsors. If you are a member, you can still check out the deals that we have for our sponsors. You could check it out with Hello Tushy today and Magic Spoon. I get texts from people who are like, what's the Fast Growing Trees coupon code? And you can always, if you Google the company and the Majority Report, you will find it. So check it out. JoinTheMajorityReport.com. Also, don't forget the AM Quickie at amquickie.com. And also, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. Get 10% off. Joining us in the fun half will be Brandon Sutton. Brandon, why don't you tell folks what's happening on the discourse?
Well, on the discourse, we're all getting vaccinated in the exact frequency that makes it impossible to record, because we're coming down with that sort of post-COVID vaccination muscle ache. So can't lift the microphone quite yet. But coming up on the discourse, we're streaming more on Twitch, and we should have an episode out by the end of today.
Oh, I see. All right. So you guys, everybody got vaccinated around there. Group vaccination for the show.
We all hold hands,
Might be solvable with a mic stand.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Do you Twitch video games, Brandon, or are you guys chatting?
Oh, no, we Twitch stream video games. I'm not much of a gamer. I'm kind of old fashioned in that way. I don't believe in it. But
what do you mean you don't believe in it?
I don't believe in it. I don't know how to be more explicit than that.
You don't think they exist?
I believe they corrupt your soul, they corrupt your spirit.
Right,
but I'm down for that sometimes. It helps.
No,
But I as somebody who's not very tech savvy, had to order a special hookup to be able to stream my PS5 to the internet, because that beyond me otherwise. So look out for that. So we're going to be streaming some games, probably PS2 games from the last time I was good at it. So look forward.
All right. And Matt, what is happening in the Matt Lekian media empire?
Yeah, we have Laura and Jim on to talk about the Reclaim Idaho documentary on the Medicaid expansion there, and also Cale Brooks, Jacobin video editor, on to talk about his article about going from posting to politics. Kind of both interviews are going to be about that. So that will be this Thursday. Left Reckoning on YouTube. Go subscribe to it, folks.
All right, folks. See you in the fun half. We are back. It's the fun half, ladies and gentlemen. Chadia Stevens' defense in the Chauvin case today called a doctor educated in apartheid-era South Africa who's being sued for covering up a police murder in Maryland because, of course, I actually interviewed two reporters from Minneapolis, Samantha Henriksen and J.D. Duggan, and they wrote a piece in The Intercept about that guy his name escapes me at the moment. I think it was specifically Anton Black's, I think, family, if I'm not mistaken. You can find that on the Peacock app, and you can check out that that story. It really is amazing. Where's Brandon? Is that it? He was just going to make an appearance in the plugs, and then
Yeah, he
he's
just
just going
wanted
to go away.
plug
Yeah,
and
exactly. He got what he wanted.
You
so.
got
Right.
He just took off after that. All right, because I want to talk about this. There was a piece written by Dan Pfeiffer, and I want to talk about that just briefly. I'll walk.
I think I
everybody
saw the tweet,
through. Yeah,
but not the piece or the. I knew.
I mean, it's
from
not
seeing the. That it was
I'll
not
walk.
worth
I'll walk
clicking.
us through it. It's not a terribly complicated piece, but it is like, sort of. I think it does capture the moment where we're at in terms of like Democrats. And I think it does also speak to like, one of the aspects of Democrats that I think it's easy to overlook. This is not to make an apology for them, but their just sheer weakness and poor understanding of the moment. A lot of times you cannot discount stupidity and incompetence in any analysis of anything at any time. I mean, I think that's, something that people often overlook.
Usually the simplest explanation and often the correct one.
That has been my experience in just about every endeavor I did. I mean, I remember being in Air America where people would write in going like, you must have a mole there. And I'm like, you know what? It's perfectly legitimate assessment from someone from the outside, because it's hard to imagine this level of incompetence. But I've never been in any context where I haven't been amazed at the level of stupidity and competence of people who are in charge of endeavors that you just presume like, oh, of course, there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars associated with this. And these people have moved up the corporate ladder, et cetera, et cetera. And so you just assume, competence, but it's not the case. And
I'm sorry, were you talking about me?
No. I mean, I may have been, but I wasn't doing that consciously, Brandon.
My inability to keep my headphones connected to my laptop.
I mean, the headphones, the lack of a stand. I mean, come on. The stand thing is pretty basic. Like if you can't hold up the microphone, you get a stand.
I mean, I like holding it. It makes me feel like I'm a deaf poetry slam poet.
That's not what you want to be?
Well, sometimes.
All right. So this is my way of like introducing a piece that Dan Pfeiffer wrote. Is he one of those guys on that, what is the Pod Save America? Yeah. Is that still going on?
It's huge now.
Oh, is
it?
Pretty
Popular, yeah.
No, they saved America, Sam. So they, shut the whole thing down.
It's Pod Saved America now.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that, but so they're still doing that. And Dan Pfeiffer was one of the guys. He was an Obama. I don't know if he was a spokesperson or what he did in the Obama administration. And he wrote a piece entitled "Why Doing Big Stuff Can Be Good Politics," and he walks through the conventional wisdom that if you do something big as a party, when you first get into office, if you're controlling, the government enough to be able to do something big, that you will anger the opposing side enough that you will lose the midterm elections, 2 years later. So the United States and Ronald Reagan, 1982, and George H.W. Bush's first midterm, Bill Clinton's first midterm, and obviously Obama's first midterm. Skips over George W. Bush because that was a weird time. We were right in the wake of 9/11. And he goes on to say that this is the sort of the type of policies that produce a backlash, and he lists them. When they impose near-term visible costs. This is apparently he got from a political scientist, guy named Patashnik. When they impose near-term visible costs, such as tax increases, when they threaten the social identities of groups, say religious beliefs, when they generate resentment about the provision of benefits to undeserving groups. I mean, generally like probably Black people or people of color. When they challenge the power groups that are highly dependent on or attached to existing arrangements, that could be like people who, Social Security, when policies don't represent the views of average voters. And so this goes through that. And Obama, he talks about the ACA. Obama took it on not because he thought it would help us win the 2010 midterms, but because it was a once in several generations opportunity to do something really important that had eluded presidents for nearly a century. While the repercussions of the 2010 election have echoed for more than a decade, for all the political risks of the ACA, it's not the only reason or even the primary reason Democrats lost in 2010. If you don't believe me, ask more than a half dozen Democrats who voted for the ACA and lost their seats that fall. He goes on to make these examples. And so his argument is essentially that maybe we're living in a different era of politics where the media landscapes are such that is no longer operative, that that it doesn't matter what you do because the right-wing media is going to say you did it anyways. And so you're going to, their base is going to be motivated. You need to motivate your base. I'm not even sure you need the media part of that mechanism, but if this is an argument for Democrats, but what's interesting to me about this is that it's a guy who was involved in the Obama administration, basically saying that in his mind, or at least this exercise is about him thinking none of this is ideological. It is all just like bad strategy. Brandon, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think it's both, right? I think the Democrats have chosen to weaponize a bad strategy of, centrist conciliatory politics, preemptively, what's I'm looking for? Preemptively meeting in the middle with Republicans before even coming to the table with their demands. And I think that the idea that was going to sufficiently woo Republican voters has been proven both practically wrong, but also it's been proven practically wrong for so many years, so many decades now, that you can only really come to the conclusion that it's the disguise of an ideological pursuit for this, for this block of voters that the Republicans captured, that suburban mom demographic. I think, where insofar that I think Dan Pfeiffer is right, is that there has been a change in politics in the sense that I think the Democrats, since Bush, Bush the Lesser, have abandoned consensus making, consensus building. They have decided that, the issue with the ACA is that people didn't want it, when I think you could argue that it was sold very poorly. I think that there was a time where the Democrats were very, Democratic media, Democratic aligned media was very excited about the idea that, Republicans don't know the difference between Obamacare and the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act or whatever, or they think there is a difference or something. And to me, that was more of a failure on the part of Obama, a failure on the part of like the leadership of the Democrats to not use that bully pulpit to make it very clear what this thing was and how it was helping people. I think that they've run away from their politics in a way that Republicans don't. And so it becomes hard to measure whether it's the politics that are unpopular. Whether it's the policies that are unpopular or if they're just being improperly sold to people.
That's interesting. My experience was that with the ACA, I think they did missell it in many respects. I think they oversold the affordable part and not the patient protection part. And they've come around to that. I mean, nobody was, when they were fighting against the Republicans overturning the ACA, a couple of years ago, nobody was saying like, but it's saving you so much money on the exchanges. No, they're talking about pre-existing conditions, and they're talking about, being 25 and still being on your parents. I mean, that was always the big sell. They did, and it took them literally 8 years to figure it out. I think there's some truth to that. And I also think, go ahead.
But part of what I think caused them to be unable to sell the ACA was the fact that it was needlessly bureaucratic and convoluted. Like, what could have made the policies more marketable would have been a straight single payer program that would have gone bigger and made things more simple. I mean, and so, that's my read on it. I'm looking at this piece now. Basically what Dan Pfeiffer cites as the lead off to his piece is he cites a tweet from Politico reporter Jake Sherman. Finally, there are two theories bouncing around right now. Either Dems should or either Dems should try to preserve the majority they have or spend it like they'll lose it. They are clearly going for the latter, which is just this false dichotomy, this false premise that, okay, so they either have to try to preserve the majority, but if they do spend, then, they could potentially lose it. As if, this is he's just the reporter. He's citing what he's hearing in Democratic circles, but
right.
They're literally drawing connections out of thin air when it's probably just the ebbs and flows of politics, and also the fact that Democrats have been scared of their own shadow and haven't been able to market themselves because of the bureaucracy and the technocratic nature of what they've proposed for the past decades.
I mean, first off, with the ACA, they could have not sold the affordable part of it that much anyways. They could have forefronted the patient protection parts and said, look, we're going to make insurance now actually function like it should be, like insurance. And if you don't have insurance and you're covered, we're going to set up a marketplace where you can get it. And it'll be somewhat cheaper than if you tried to buy it on your own. But this is going to make sure that you can't, that the thing that you don't know that's, hidden in your insurance contract that is so complicated that could screw you over if you get hit by a bus, that's going to go away. I mean, people don't realize this, but like you could hit lifetime limits then. You could hit yearly limits. Now there's still insurance is highly problematic. I don't want it, but I'm just saying they could have worked with what they had in terms of selling it better. But it seems to me that there used to be this dynamic back like in show business 20, 30 years ago, where if you were a film actor, you would not do TV and you would not do commercials because you were afraid of what you would do would ruin your career. That's all gone now in this era. It's like you do whatever you do everything. Just getting work begets other work. Nobody pays a price for someone being on a commercial anymore. And on some level, like this is the analogy is only, works so much, but I think like the idea is that you're going to pay for what you don't do more than what you do, frankly, at this point in our politics. Like it's one thing to pass the Affordable Care Act, but if you had passed multiple other things, you are keeping the Republicans on the defensive. And one of the things that was effective about Donald Trump and the Republicans during that era was just like nobody could catch their breath. And on some level, like the relentlessness of just keep going forward. I think the size of the COVID relief bill and frankly, the size of anything going forward actually works in the favor of the Democrats because it becomes too hard for the Republicans to figure out what they're talking about. Remember, like in the COVID relief bill, they were talking about like provisions that were like $13 million to blankety blank. And everybody was like, $13 million. This is a $1.9 trillion bill. What are you complaining about a $13 million expenditure for? Like, that's what the cost of the printing was to make the bill.
Complain about how you would stack these bills and it would reach Mars or whatever if you did it $1 a second or whatever they were trying to do.
Exactly. Like you make it so big that they can't figure out a way to get their arms around it to actually criticize it.
So I think that's a good point. Both the size of the bill and also what Emma was saying earlier about the single payer being sort of stripped out and, of the ACA and PPACA rather, who's deciding what's big, right? Who's deciding, I think, what constitutes as big enough to, constitute something willingly contributing a backlash if we concede that the right-wing media is going to treat everything as though it's huge, right? There should be a measure of excess in that case to measure what is going to be a right-wing fear campaign anyway. because ultimately what people are going to react against is not going to be like that the bill did too much to help them, but that it wouldn't, they didn't see the impact in their own personal lives, that like the PPACA didn't do enough to actually counteract the healthcare costs that they were experiencing once they lost their jobs. So the technocratic aspects that the Democrats are always chasing, the right, the exact right piece of society to help, only does a disservice in the end towards the practical goal of A, winning elections versus Republicans, and B, theoretically, if they are actually dedicated to it, helping the people they're trying to help. So, I think when it comes down to Dan Pfeiffer's criticism, it concedes too much to the Republicans in the sense that like keeping things the same does not constitute a big decision, because it's like, okay, well, deciding to expand Medicare is this huge bill, whereas allowing people to continue to die at a rate due to pre-existing conditions that is unique to the world is simply the way things are. So it can be treated as like a normal standard quo, right? So status quo. So I think, part of reshaping this conversation is to not necessarily, concede that the ACA was a big bill, but that it was, a small stopgap to solve a big problem that still exists.
It's almost like the Democrats have to build in their own golf handicap to like counteract how the Republicans are going to message against it by going bigger and trying for more in order to, I guess, I don't know, make sure that it kneecaps any Republican effort against it. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I think if you look at the ACA, if you look at that bill as the patient protections and as an expansion of 10 million people for Medicaid, the thing looks a lot better, right? I mean, the problem was that they oversold it as something that was actually sort of, and because it is a big deal. I mean, to add 10 million people to Medicaid and to change, to highly regulate that insurance product, and create that expectation is a big deal. The problem is that they focused on the one part of it that, it only impacts 10 million people in terms of their insurance. Like you say, it doesn't, the only thing that impacts everybody is the patient protection part. Everything else is just completely, it doesn't affect me.
And I think you also hit the nail on the head earlier, Sam, when you said the Democrats don't do enough like big things like this. And so I think a part of that becomes when they do a big thing like the ACA, they become overly wed to it. And it becomes something that, hey, I thought Obamacare was a stepping stone to universal coverage in a sort of single payer way. That was how I remember being sold at the time. But because the Democrats, they made it incredibly weak in terms of not only the way it was sold, but what it fully does. We're going to constantly be on the defensive to preserve something that was supposedly just going to be a for now thing. And, because it was the last thing Democrats can really point to that say like, hey, this helped a bunch of people.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point, because it's almost like the structure in itself is just so flimsy, and it's a tent and that people were sleeping in and the house was promised, and yet we're over a decade later and we're still sleeping in that tent, and it's moldy and wet and damp, and we still have to pretend that it's sufficient.
Turns out to be made out of canvas, and so if you touch it when it rains, it leaks. But there is
good tent knowledge, Sam. Very good.
Thank you. You got to be old to know about a canvas tent. Jeff Stein wrote a piece, I guess this is 2 days ago, about the two sort of forces that are amassing in the second tranche of the infrastructure bill, right? Like the first tranche is what we've been debating as to whether or not this is really infrastructure and blah, blah, blah. The second tranche has to do more like with helping people. And this is where, and there's some debate as to whether or not they're going to bring these bills together in reconciliation to make it a more must pass, which I hope they do, because I think like the second part of this is going to get lost. But there is a battle that is, at least Jeff Stein characterized it as being between Pelosi and Sanders. Pelosi, of course, hates the idea of single payer healthcare and seems to be willing to fight on any field to prevent anything that even moves in that direction. We saw it in the context of the HEROES Act, which was ostensibly a messaging bill, and it expanded it subsidized Cobra, and as opposed to like everybody gets on Medicare for a year or something like that. And that provision ended up in the relief bill, the $1.9 trillion. And by any account, particularly for someone who was pushing PAYGO, it makes no sense. You know, from a receiving end, okay, great. I have health insurance and it's free for me. Same would have been if it was Medicare, except for from a paying end, it costs the government so much more money. And this is a person who champions PAYGO. So she really, 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 really doesn't want there to be a government-run health insurance program for everybody. And
you can't show it's possible. You can't show it's possible in a crisis situation to provide people with healthcare because God forbid we move forward with single payer.
That's literally like what she said.
That's what they said. So we'll do a program that sucks that costs 4 times more.
Yeah. And but in the next sort of like tranche of the infrastructure bill, the question is, do you sink more money into the ACA, keep propping up the subsidies, maintain the subsidies that are there now so that you're paying off the health insurance industry, but it's really not ultimately about the health insurance industry in my mind. Or do you, let's say, drop Medicare to 55? And
I think that's easy.
And, you know, there's different cohorts of people who are being helped here. That's true. And that's going to be the argument that they make. Like if it's the ACA, you're getting people throughout their age, theoretically, broader health insurance, as opposed to just 55 and end up with Medicare. But this is going to be the big battle, I think, that we're going to see in that tranche, if that tranche is even real.
Oh, yeah.
Let's go ahead, Brandon.
No, I was just going to say, I agree. And I think that ultimately there's been a concerted effort, not just with, healthcare and health insurance during the pandemic, but with basic, necessities all across the board to prevent people from being able to, disaggregate their ability to, afford to see the doctor from being employed. And I think that both Pelosi and Sanders are quite, I think they're both savvy enough to understand that if we can get through the pandemic without making real strides towards single payer, towards like everyone being under a government program, then this is sort of like, not to be crass, but the Sandy Hook moment for that. Like, it becomes increasingly unlikely that we'll ever be able to pass healthcare legislation if we made it through this pandemic and people still weren't able to like get it. Because it's like, okay, well, how much worse can it be than a health crisis where 1 in 600 Americans have just died of COVID-19, and we still haven't moved towards single payer. So if we can get through the whole thing without people expecting that, then maybe they'll never expect it.
I got to say, I have always hesitated to make that connection because of that reason. It's just like, this is not, there's no way it's going to be a 12-month fight to get this, and regardless of what it is, a single payer. It's just not happening. And it has never been that, clearly we needed to come up with a solution of what happens when you lose your job and where you are in health insurance. And for me, putting people on Medicare, emergency Medicare, would have been the best solution. But I've always been nervous about rhetorically putting it through there because of what you just said, is that, we need a Medicare for all, a single payer system, for a multitude of reasons. And the pandemic may be one, but I don't think like tying it towards that pandemic was ever because you're basically training people like, well, if we can get through this with just COBRA subsidies, then we've got, crisis over. And the point is like, no, there's an ongoing crisis that is here, that does not wax or wane regardless of what the broader, a momentary emergency.
Well, yeah, I mean, we were always in a healthcare crisis in America, in a health coverage crisis in America because people lacked it. But I think prior to the pandemic, prior to the economic recession and mass layoffs that came with the pandemic, it was easier for the response to, well, what should I do about health insurance if I lose my job? To be, well, you shouldn't lose your job, or you should you should have another job lined up before that happens. It can to single people out as being responsible for their choice to lack in healthcare and subsidize themselves with COBRA or something.
But I don't know. I think that may be the case, but I don't know. Like, during the aughts when this came up, when it, like leading it to 2008, there was a crisis in 2008, but this was already pretty settled that we needed to deal with healthcare. And I think like I think I just am nervous about relying on crises as a basis of this, because if they get past the crisis without doing it, then it makes the argument less compelling.
Well, you can do both. You can do both. You can do a disaster capitalist approach where you try to capitalize on these situations.
I think you should push it in there. Yes.
But that's why Bernie's right with the Medicare thing. And I know you have to step out for a sec, Sam, but that's why Bernie's right to use this opportunity to drop Medicare eligibility to 55 as
without a doubt
to bolstering the ACA, because we don't need to fortify the soggy tent that we've been living in, right? To use that same analogy from earlier. We need to build a framework for the house, and dropping the eligibility does that.
And frankly, it also bolsters the ACA. It's going to make the risk pool for ACA smaller and theoretically more healthy. Older people tend to be sicker, but you could also just sort of say, like, we'll also take, I mean, I wouldn't want to take necessarily sicker people, from younger population is going to put too much stress on Medicare unless you get everybody involved. But it can be sold that way. But this is going to be a big fight. And all right, I'm going to step out for 1 second, and then I'll be back in just a moment.
All right, Brandon, how about we get into some clips?
No, absolutely. I love clips.
Oh, you love clips?
I do. And I just want to say, I agree with you, Emma. I think it's always, in times like this, you have to, find the middle ground between like making, use of the situation in the moment, but also crafting it as part of a long-term criticism of like, the health crisis just didn't start today. If only because like at the end, people are going to look back who didn't do either and say like, well, we got past it, so it was fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Just looking at some clips that we need to. Let's do Five Guys. Ted Cruz.
Ooh, Five Guys. That sounds delicious.
Five Guys. I would love a Five Guys burger after this. I've been on a salad kick this week because I ate so badly last week. Would love a burger.
Although
I think I like Shake Shack more. Gotta say.
I disagree. I don't like Shake Shack's fries.
I know people do. Yeah.
I don't like Shake Shack.
Fries aren't good.
And the burgers aren't like. I think the burgers are a little small. Five Guys. I've been also thinking about Five Guys recently. But it seems a little bit, much to have it delivered. I don't think the burger would make it the whole trip. So
yeah, exactly. I've been doing a lot more takeout nearby burger places during the pandemic. I was a big burger chain attendee, and the pandemic like really stopped that. Like,
what were your favorites before though?
I mean, I went to Shake Shack, but I'm a Whopper fan, so I'll go to Burger King. Even I'm a McDonald's guy, and like I've done none of that the entire time.
Five Guys gives me a stomach ache. It's like too much of whatever. It's
a lot. Smash Burger was my favorite. I don't know if people have had that before.
They have those in New Jersey. They have one right by where I grew up. I like Smash Burger. I don't think they have Shake Shacks in Jersey too, I guess too. Five Guys.
I think my favorite, like semi-chain, like fast casual burger restaurant would either be like Red Robin or like a Cheeseburger, like hard to find places that in New York City. But like, Red Robin's had the bottomless fries that they don't judge you for. And, Cheeseburger just has like that, full pound burger.
They had a Sheetz in Pennsylvania where I went to college. I like Sheetz.
What are you guys talking about?
Burgers.
Burger.
Step out for 1 minute.
Emma said, let's do Five Guys, and then we got distracted by burgers.
I said, let's do five, guys, and then we talked about burgers, and now we can do clip 5, and you're back already.
All right. Well, let's let's go into this. This is obviously like Ted Cruz being completely repugnant.
Inclusive than what they have in Colorado or Delaware or New York. And with reaction, Senator Cruz, Senator, I'd be negligent if I didn't ask you about what's unfolding in Minnesota tonight again. And now they have a mayor talking about taking away non-lethal alternatives for police.
Well, obviously what's unfolding in Minnesota is horrific, and the violence that we're seeing has a potential to spill out and get out of control. It began with what now appears to be a tragic accident, and an accident where a man's life was taken through a mistake. Unfortunately, in the course of interactions with law enforcement, sometimes there are accidents that occur, but this is a situation where the racial powder keg that we see the left willing to light the fire of and incite violence, incite murders that we saw all across the country, murders of police officers, fires and burning of stores is wrong, and it's horrific. The shooting needs to be fully investigated. It needs to be gotten to the bottom of why that happened. But the answer is not engaging in violent riots, and there are a whole lot of Democratic politicians who celebrate and encourage this kind of lawlessness and resort to violence, and it has become a central part of the Democratic Party.
It reminds me of a headline from CNN from March. Famine has arrived in Yemen.
I was just going to say, man's life was taken.
Right. No, but that wasn't even as bad as what he said. He said, like, the accident that occurred, something like that. You know, there's no human actor involved here that caused that accident to occur. And was murder or killing uttered once? I mean, he says a man was killed, but the first thing out of his mouth was, oh, the violence in the streets. It's just the use of the passive voice.
He didn't even say man was killed. He said man's life was taken.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes, there you go. So just a great way for him to shield the world from his sociopathy.
I don't think that Ted Cruz has the ability to self-reflect, but the hesitance in his voice as he was speaking just made it impossible for me not to think that he was thinking about like the January 6th, like Capitol riots as he was talking about and like talking about what was happening in Minnesota, because it's impossible not to think about when you watch him. And so I imagine that he in his head was like, you know, when you say these things, it just sounds a little silly. It just sounds a little silly. Of course, you know, people aren't going to make those parallels stick with him because he's been able, amazingly enough, to pretend like he had nothing to do with that. But like, it's hard not to imagine that that's what's running through his mind as he's saying it. Like, yeah, you know, the Democratic politicians who incite these sort of things and this kind of this incitement that, and you're like, yeah, you know, could you imagine anyone inciting anything, Ted Cruz?
Yeah, that's a good point. I also wonder, you know, there's no evidence that this stuff worked from a political standpoint with their people in 2020. I mean, the polling was definitely off. We just heard, this idea that Democratic politicians are inciting riots, as opposed to like, hey, there was literally a killing of another unarmed black man 10 minutes away from a trial of a killing of an unarmed black man. Like, I mean, like it's just, it's almost so absurd that you could sort of pretend that you don't see that there is something fundamentally and systemically wrong when this is happening. Like it's almost like a hat on a hat type of situation.
And how is he gonna move back into Brandon's point, you know, being pro cop when he said absolutely boo about the officer or multiple officers, you know, there were suicides afterwards in the Capitol riot. I mean, like it's almost I didn't even think about that when watching the clip about how he was trying to toe that line. not that Republicans care about being hypocrisy shamed, but I don't know. He's got to go one way.
I think some of these statements that he makes are not necessarily for any particular voter, but for some reason, despite not necessarily being effective at moving votes all that well, it might be enough to pressure Democratic politicians to, symbolically condemn a few of their colleagues who are speaking out a little too loudly in favor of, BLM or whatever. But I think even that has kind of just faded away. The Democrats aren't doing as much, I don't know what you call it, as much sort of appealing to that sort of racial dog whistle that the Republicans were able to better weaponize against them prior to last summer. I think now, whether or not the Democratic Party is actually pro-racial justice in any meaningful way is debatable. Probably, they're split, but the ability for Republicans to use this kind of Democrats are inciting violence to get, Democratic politicians to condemn other Democratic politicians or to infight, if nothing else seems to be waning. But I think that's an old trick that they try to get to work, even if it doesn't work on the voters, because the Democrats can be a little bit skittish about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's a good point. So far, we haven't really seen too much of that, though, have we? I mean, there was an attempt coming out of the election for some of those people to say, this is about to fund the police. That's why I nearly lost. But there was no data to support that, and it just sort of went away.
Well, and I think also just from a practical standpoint, a lot of Democratic mayors, I can't imagine it's, comfortable to have to be at the, being held hostage by your police chiefs. Look at what happened to Bill de Blasio. He came in, talking pretty leftist stuff, and he was doing all gonna reform the police, and now he in the middle of protests, he's walking in the streets saying the police are great, and they're secretly threatening his kids. And it's just they're the practical element of this, where there are reasons why Democratic politicians and the local and municipal levels might want to maybe not agree ideologically with defunding the police, but definitely want to rein in those powers, because they want their own power. They don't want to be, have the thumb of the police chief under them or over them.
There's barely any Democrats left at the local level.
Exactly.
Someone should do a piece, but I saw, and I can't find it right now, but within 100 years ago, there's explicit cases of law enforcement rejecting the will of politicians through force in this country and saying, in their capacity as law enforcement, and saying, we're just not going to do that. And I mean, again, often along racial lines.
Let's go to clip number 7. This is Sebastian Gorka on Newsmax with Grant Stinchfield. And this is
on his show, Stinchfield.
Is that the name of his show?
Yeah, because it's the most, I guess, inartful last name. They just had to find a way to work it in.
It can't possibly be pronounced that way.
I have a cousin whose last name is Stinchcombe, which I think.
Ooh.
That might be
That's even worse.
It should be the stench with Stinchfield.
This is one of the few occasions where I both agree. I agree with Sebastian Gorka, but maybe for the wrong reasons. Here is Stinchfield and Gorka talking about John Boehner.
Look at that, the tolerant left, Sam. That's
yep, there we go. I'm trying to reach out.
Well, that's because John Boehner's trying to sell books here by calling Republicans, conservative Republicans, bad names. I'm sure that's what this is about. Dr. G, if you can, 30 seconds, I'll give you the last word.
To quote one of the few reputable journalists left in the business, so you can check out the tweet, it's on my timeline. People going to meet John Boehner when he was actually in Congress had to check with his staff to see whether he was drunk that day. That's John Boehner. He's a lush, he's an alcoholic, and by the way, it's not a coincidence that he's now in the cannabis and alcohol business. So that's all you need to know about that snowflake. Good riddance.
I mean, can I just say that's probably because Boehner wants to make money, not because he just loves intoxicants. I think he's happy with
Right. It's not like you couldn't buy the stuff.
Right.
Stick to the first one. Stick to the first argument, because like buddy Sebastian Gorka, the buddy of Sebastian Gorka is Steve Bannon, who, you know, is like the picture perfect definition of somebody who drinks a lot.
Well, regardless, I mean, John Boehner was a lush, but here's the point, is that the real criticism of Boehner should be that he is so full of garbage that the idea that he's going to sort of like, you know, attempt to, I don't know, reform his image for the sake of history, or maybe it's to sit on a couple of boards, I don't know. But John Boehner was as responsible as anyone for the rise of Trumpism. He nurtured the Tea Party. He coddled these people when he was asked about whether he would do something about, you know, members of his caucus who were raising a bill about birtherism. He said, that's not my job. There is nothing that John Boehner didn't do that in any way didn't sort of grease the wheels, as it were, for the birth of the Tea Party movement, which is almost indistinguishable from whatever Trumpism is. And this is okay. Do we do? All right. Yeah, play this. This is a this is a revisionist history on Morning Joe. Play this clip.
You saw in those early years under President Obama, and then draw the line to Donald Trump and his presidency?
Well, you know, we had the Tea Party movement in 2010. Frankly, most of those Tea Party members, if you will, became good, solid Republicans, good members to work with. But also in that class, you had some pretty crazy people. And, you know, they would have these conversations about Obama's birth certificate and crazy things like this. And I happened to go on Meet the Press sometime when I was speaker early 2011, and I was asked about do I believe that Barack Obama is a U.S. citizen. I said the state of Hawaii produced a birth certificate claiming that Barack Obama was a citizen of the state of Hawaii, which is part of the United States of America. Well, the blowback I got was just beyond belief. So here I am trying to work with somebody that I don't have a lot in common with. But, you know, I'm the Speaker of the House. He's President of the United States. We're trying to get things done. We've got to have a relationship. And here I'm trying to deal with people who think that he was some Kenyan-born Muslim, for God's sakes. And it just got worse. You know, by 2010, you know, talk radio was in full blast. Cable TV had moved to all politics 24/7. And then, you know, you have the internet, and all of a sudden you got these social media platforms allowing members to spew all kinds of nonsense and to create themselves in whatever image they wanted to create out of whole cloth. And trying to bring those members along, bring them into the party was rather difficult. All of this being driven by, frankly, how divided America is. America was getting divided, you know, back in the early 2000s, and was growing during my speakership. And frankly, Donald Trump's election was a product of the giant schism we see in American politics today between Republicans and Democrats.
Who did that?
What's amazing?
Who did that?
Exactly.
Talk about the use of the passive voice in that Ted Cruz clip.
Exactly.
Check that one out. Yeah.
You know, for Boehner to, you know, from Boehner's history of himself, he is just a guy watching all this happen. He is the Speaker of the House. And it's like he's just looking outside going, it's raining.
He's
and
Nick
he doesn't
Carraway
even think he can have an umbrella. Never mind the fact that, like, I mean, he's in charge of what the development of the party was a function of John Boehner. And the idea, it's like, I went on and I specifically said that there was a document produced by Hawaii. No, yeah, as opposed to like, yeah, no, he's a citizen of the country. Like, that's absurd. And I've admonished he wouldn't do that. And here he is trying to sort of pass that off. And they're letting him too. That's the thing. They're letting him to play with this whole notion.
You know what's interesting? I heard that they had canceled Drunk History, but from my watch, it's still going on, because you could very easily just like wash over some dramatic recreation of like the Obama era Tea Party Congress people, I guess, with like, I don't know, Jonah Hill as like John Boehner, and it would be indistinguishable from those episodes, the way he like depersonified and decentered himself from that, and you know, the slurring too.
Except it would be actual history. Like but you know, on Drunk History, they have some standards to adhere to what actually happened.
When Boehner used to be asked, is Barack Obama a Christian? His response was, he says he is.
Well, I mean,
that is not like come on, like of course, like that is, I mean, that is the functional equivalent of saying, like, if you can trust him, I don't know. It's up to you. You decide. Can you trust this guy? I don't know.
If you can trust Hawaiians, right? That doesn't really sound like Hawaii is a state. If you believe in that sort of thing,
Yeah, technically speaking, it's a state of the United States. So.
But I mean, also that, like Gorka said, Boehner is now in the weed industry. So I guess this is like the sequel. It's like Faded History, which explains why it's just a little bit less accurate, because he's, he's drinking and smoking.
Crossfaded. Yeah. I mean, then Boehner's all about that life. Yeah. I can't believe that this cottage industry of Republicans who make a ton of money, like even John Bolton sold a ton of books, and Boehner is going to sell a ton of books just because they were far-right figures that spoke badly about Trump, and now Boehner's taking this into its next iteration, the Trump movement. I mean, how gullible are the people that are purchasing these books? Why is there an audience for this? And partially because it's manufactured consent by cable news outlets, having these guys on and listening to them and entertaining this. And the second part is he's, completely washing over his agency as a leader and pretending that he had no input in the way that history went. I mean, like that to me I would be embarrassed to do that. To completely get away from or remove myself from the history that I was very much a part of.
And the question is like the question from from Willie Geist should have been, what accounted for that polarization? Like what do you think it was? You're a lifelong member of the Republican Party. You've been a Republican politician for years. Before you were a speaker, you were in the leadership. What accounted for that polarization coming out of when the country was attacked and was supposedly supposed to come together type of thing? I mean, it is. They should not let this guy on TV. I'm sorry.
But Emma raises a good point. Like, is there an audience for a book like this, or is this another one of those situations where like some PAC is going to like funnel the money into buying like enough copies to put it as number one on like the New York Times bestsellers list?
Oh, I'm sure there's so much of that. But it doesn't erase the media's role in this, where they're attempting to make this a thing, because there's an insatiable appetite for this kind of narrative, and they pretend that they're completely independent and they'll take news as it comes, and yet they can't help but get it up for like this kind of story every time, and it's the same story every time. It's boring and it's harmful.
No, I agree. I think these like redemption narratives that we are always subject to always rely on, like Sam said, an abstraction of a person's time in these places that borders on just like incoherent, because it's like it would be like if you interviewed an arsonist and he was just like, I've been around a lot of fires in my day, and so I have a lot of knowledge about that. And then like I'm writing a book about like fire safety, and at no point did ever come up that like the reason he's around these fires is not because he's like a fireman or a fire safety inspector, but because he burns down buildings.
I want to add to that. Yes. The add to the analogy would be like, and let me write about some of the losses that we've suffered because of arson. I mean, these are great structures that really ashamed to see them gone now. And of course, he was there with like, I got the kerosene, guys.
Because in a perverse kind of logic, there is no one who, very few people have as much experience with fire as arsonists. So if you don't care what that experience is and the nuances of it, theoretically, you can have these kinds of broad conversations.
Let's go to some.
Can I just, we mentioned that Boehner voted for Trump in 2020, saying he, largely agrees with his policies. So I don't know how any of these other interviews occur without that being like the first question.
I didn't know who he was at the time. I didn't realize.
That's because
I didn't realize he would be like this.
Biden, notoriously anti-pot. John Boehner, big smoker.
Yeah.
Denver Dave. I got to say, Boehner's living room looks exactly like I thought it would.
Also,
covered in smoke.
Denver Dave. That's all he wrote. Boston Baked Bob. Sam, you fossilized dung beetle. You look like a freezer burned fish stick put on a wig. You are truly the Michael Jordan of baseball of political commentary. Love the show and wanted to ask if you've considered getting Jamie on the show as a guest. I, for one, miss her, and it'd be nice if she kept in touch with the show, like old Matt, for instance. I think we're going to do that at one point. I think she's on vacation still. Just Kafovi. White shirt Wednesdays ruined. Militant apathy. Ask Dave about the Cam Newton hate that continues to persist. Sorry about that. Libertarian recovery. And if you think deficits don't matter, there's an opportunity for those on the left to accomplish goals like reining in the rich, paying for social programs by using deficits as the excuse. I would rather not deploy that because I think the point is that, there's enough people who do deploy that. I frankly, like, the reason why we raise taxes on rich people is for wealth inequality reasons, in my mind. And you also, in the event that there is some type of inflation, that's the way you would do it too. But I don't like to I think that's too dangerous. Stop the meal. I took a look at Fox News' front page this morning and was not surprised that they're wasting no time in digging up Daunte Wright's past, attempting to pull the he's no angel tactic once again. Of course. Speaking of which, remember that guy, Matt Walsh, the not funny one, the one who's on the Daily Wire, not the one who was
beard dye guy.
Yeah. Not the guy who was on Veep.
I always think when I hear Matt Walsh, the guy who did America's Most Wanted, but that is not his name.
No. Well, Matt Walsh on Daily Wire, here he is arguing that not getting mad enough about the systemic killing of Black people by the police is a sign that you are a free thinker.
Listen to the language there. I would fight to the death to prove I'm not a racist. And he would. This stands in contrast to my own approach as someone who won't even fight you in a thumb war to prove I'm not a racist. I literally won't lift a finger to prove I'm not a racist. I won't do a single thing at all to prove I'm not a racist. And that's because I'm not a monkey with a tambourine marching around and making noises at your behest. I'm not a puppet dancing on your string. I'm not a dog barking on command. Whatever analogy you prefer. It's not my job to prove anything to you.
Pause it 1 second. I want you just to think about this. He is saying that he is not going to prove or to show that he's anti-racist for the sake of other people are forcing him to, right? Like when you're a puppet on a string, you have no agency. When you're a monkey dancing with a tambourine,
which he went with first, by the way.
Yes. When you are a monkey, you have no agency. That's the point of that. And so his argument is I'm not going to perform for you. I'm not going to pretend. He doesn't really quite realize that he's saying this, but he would have to pretend. It's not anything that would come from him. And that's his implication, is that if you're out there fighting against racism, you're doing it for other people. You're don't actually believe it. You're being forced to. So just go back and continue on with it.
I literally won't lift a finger to prove I'm not a racist. I won't do a single thing at all to prove I'm not a racist. And that's because I'm not a monkey with a tambourine marching around and making noises at your behest. I'm not a puppet dancing on your string. I'm not a dog barking on command. Whatever analogy you prefer, it's not my job to prove anything to you. And I don't care to. I'm not going to be held hostage by the bogus labels you throw at me. And considering the fact that all white people are called racist for literally everything we do and say all the time, the term has lost all meaning and power. I don't care when people try to pin it on me. It doesn't mean anything. It has no impact. And this is how you really neutralize the labeling tactic. If somebody says, you're racist, and you break down in tears like Dax here, begging them, screaming, no, I'm not. I swear I'm not. Please believe me, I'm not. They already win. And you already lose. The whole point of them calling you that was to get exactly that reaction, which is why it frustrates them so much when they say, you're racist. And you respond with a yawn and say, oh, you think so? Okay. Well, you're not going to deny it? They don't know what to do with that. You're not following the script, and you shouldn't.
Who's they? And also, it doesn't help when you doesn't help to say you're not like a monkey with an instrument when you have like a banjo in the background. Because all I could think was like, well, you could be a monkey with a banjo if you chose.
His whole career is literally functioning as a monkey with a tambourine. Like, I mean, that's what you're doing, right? You're on YouTube or whatever it is every day, trying to make an argument and have people believe you. If that's his definition, that's his whole career. It's just that he doesn't want it. I'm not going to make an effort to show people that I'm not racist. I don't care if they consider me racist. He doesn't say because they're wrong.
The thing about that logic, which is always, I mean, I guess it's you can sort of the umbrella term of like virtue signaling, which was popular like years ago, I guess now, is that it kind of implies that, people are forcing him to do this, forcing him to like say that he's not racist everywhere he goes. Now, I've never experienced that, let's say because I'm Black, who knows? But I would just call some of that like, fake, that's not happening to him, but also like social norms. Like, yeah, there are social norms as things change, people expect different things from you, it is what it is. But I don't believe in virtue signaling to that extent. But if you do believe in that, then who is this video for? Is this video just not another form of that kind of virtue signaling? Is this just not signaling that you're not racist? Like, I don't believe that like that's
I'm a tough guy.
Like, I mean, because it implies that like everything that we do is to signal some kind of virtue in some sense. So this is in his mind, like he's signaling that he's a free thinker. He's a free thinking individual because he's resisting this kind of external force of like anti-racist propaganda or, anti-racist fascism, like if you want to use their kind of words. But, it as somebody on the outside, it's like, I can kind of interpret that as you're trying to signal something to somebody else that is really not quite that.
Well, at the end, it's go on, Sam.
Well, he's signaling that racism isn't real.
Yeah.
I mean, he's saying that it's the only that accusations of being racist or proclamations of being anti-racist are all just performative because there's no way it could be an actually sincerely held belief because there's not racism out there. That racism for him is just something that's deployed in some type of argument.
I guess to that point, it's funny because he doesn't, but like, because what's really performative is just like anti-racism because it's quite convoluted. Because racists are like racists, but he's developed this, intermediate step where he has to, establish his free thought, from somebody, I guess, or to his audience of this next step post anti-racism or whatever it is that he's, defining this as. Whereas, for most people, I think it's not quite that complex.
Right.
Well, the where he ended up was just about owning the libs, like making them feel uncomfortable. They're not going to know what to do with this. Could you imagine if on the left, our commentary was all centered around how can we make conservatives feel like shit, right? Like, you know, it's that's so much of their ideology is just owning the left, as if we care.
But the funny thing about that is, and I guess, not maybe this is the point on their end, either, explicitly or implicitly, to like carve out this population of people who like are incapable of existing in like the real world, is that most people aren't that complicated thinking about it. If most people say, oh, racism makes them feel bad because they were raised under some sort of like wishy-washy, like Family Matters type popular culture. And so, I think it's interesting that these people condition their audiences to freak out at the most minor changes in society, the most minor interpersonal, most minor interpersonal events that most people would just be like, annoyed by, like, oh, I have to go to EEO training at my job, or I have to go to anti-harassment training at my job. So, just I'm going to eat the free food and like look at my phone and answer all the questions properly because like, yeah, I get it. I get it. But like for people like who watch this show and believe this hype, which for him is all performative, it just makes them incapable of existing in these kinds of, normal interactions. Like, yeah, like they're boring sometimes, like jury duty is boring, but that's society now. And you just end up with people who are incapable of like having like a anti-racist coordinator come in at their job without having like a meltdown, and then it's suddenly like the left's fault, and it's suddenly like because cancel culture is carving out a space in corporate America. It's like, well, yeah, sometimes you gotta do stuff you don't like to do. Like some things are boring, right. Can you imagine? It's just like, but you probably, I don't think it does anybody a service to condition them to freak out at that.
To be fair, though, some of those, Robin DiAngelo seminars are pretty dumb. But
yeah, I mean, some of them are dumb. There's all sorts of dumb crap you have to do all the time, and it's just like this stuff is just sort of like specifically singled out as the most oppressive.
Yeah, but there's just a weird cottage industry with that author of White Fragility, where it's like corporate America's like, let's contract her out, and other people like her, and this is solved. But
no, definitely. I think there is a middle ground between like criticism of the corporatization and liberalization of social justice, and like what I guess the far right does, which is condition their like their base to just be incapable of dealing with it in like a critical manner. It just becomes like, okay, well, we have a person coming in on my job, and I'm just going to do like the trolley just ask questions bit and until I lose my job. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, they shouldn't be allowed to fire you, but like, don't listen to like people who write about cancel culture about how to act on your job.
Right. One thing that strikes me is, obviously there's a lot going on with the Chauvin trial and with the protest in Minneapolis. So this may be a little bit of a coincidence where, Matt Walsh is out there saying, I'm not going to lift a finger to, and really undercutting the whole concept of like anti-racism is just some type of like fake thing that is performative because, presumably because what are you anti to? He doesn't believe it exists. Here's Charlie Kirk, essentially, and this, goes to show you, like, the power of Tucker Carlson. This is what Rush Limbaugh played this role back in the day. He'd go on and say something on his radio show, and then within a day or two, all of the right-wing talkers are tacking towards that direction because Limbaugh has provided oxygen there that they can go in and given them some room to move into that space, and B, that's where the dollars are. Here's Charlie Kirk trying to sort of get back some of that old shine. It's tough when you get old and you're still hanging out at colleges. It's sort of like, I don't know if you saw, it's like the School Days. What character that guy? I can't remember his name now, but the guy, the 30-year-old hanging out at the high schools.
You're talking about Happy Days?
No, not School Days.
You're talking about Dazed and Confused?
Dazed and Confused. Yeah.
Think about Van Wilder.
Yeah, like the idea of like, hanging out. Charlie Kirk is moving into that territory now. Like, why, dude? Maybe it's not time for you to be in college anymore. But here he is. This is the next chapter for him. That is, to justify the replacement theory.
What's happening with Tucker and what he's talking about, because he is receiving an unprecedented amount of backlash trying to cancel his show, one of the most successful, if not the most successful, cable television nightly news shows in history. So Tucker had a 1-minute, 47-second conversation with Mark Stein. Nothing about it was controversial at all. And Tucker, he made me so proud.
Oh, that's nice.
I was proud to cheer him on last evening because Tucker doubled and tripled down last evening.
Bro, he doesn't think of you.
So what Tucker was really talking about is how demographics play a role in shaping the American electorate. Now, generally, I do not like the overemphasis on people's voting bloc. But now that we have customizable political choices that are based on your race, creed, sex, and gender, whether we like it or not, groups are going to vote more and more in a certain direction. That's the downside of identity politics, which we abhor.
All right, there's a couple of things here. First off is he's not addressing the first night of what Tucker Carlson said. He's going to where Tucker Carlson backed off it a little bit and made it about just an electoral argument rather than just this idea of like you're being replaced. Secondly, I've got some very bad news for Charlie Kirk and his whole theory about identity politics and people. He might want to look at the color of every president that existed prior to 2008. He might want to look at the gender, the vast majority of American politicians, and see, like the identity politics that have been played. This is the same analogy to cancel culture. Identity politics have always existed. It's just that now there are identities that are gaining power and they're starting to reflect. That's going to be reflected in our politics. Identity politics have been ongoing. In fact, there's one party that represents the concept of identity politics more than any party, perhaps in the history of this country. And that is the Republican Party today, because they vote for white people overwhelmingly and overwhelmingly white men. And they're made up of overwhelmingly white people.
I just think that, it's getting a little sad, Sam, well, both because of everything you said, but also because he's starting to like Michael Cera when they brought him back to play like George Michael in like the later seasons of Arrested Development. And they were like, oh no, he's still in college, but it's like 30-year-old Michael Cera. But I mean, you're right. And also, it's not only just identity politics that the Republican Party, weaponizes. It's just grievance politics. It's like the complex victimology that comes with like an imagined assault on your place in society. That's like, that's the ties that bind them together. And, also like trying to get rich. But that's also, the way the Democrats are trying to make inroads into the Republican Party, leaving more and more only the people who are motivated by pure petty grievances as being in control. So, I think it's just interesting that the projection that comes from the far right on that realm, like, the left is about grievance, the left is about victimhood, the left is about identity, while the right is about some sort of logic and fact-based politics rooted in like traditional Western values.
All right, let's go. Let's do this one about Tucker Carlson. Basically now deciding like, I need to get some anti-vax audience. This is to see him like, completely constructing his audience this way. It's fascinating. Here is Tucker Carlson last night. I'm both ignoring what the CDC has advised for people who have been vaccinated and also ignoring the basic notion of public health.
The federal health authorities also recommend that you continue to wear your mask when you go outside. How long will this continue? Well, according to Yahoo News, experts say it's, quote, not entirely clear when it will be considered okay for people who are fully vaccinated to stop wearing masks. At some point, no one's asking this, but everyone should be. What is this about? If vaccines work, why are vaccinated people still banned from living normal lives? Honestly, what's the answer to that? It doesn't make any sense at all. If the vaccine is effective, there is no reason for people who have received the vaccine to wear masks or avoid physical contact. So maybe it doesn't work and they're simply not telling you that. Well, you hate to think that, especially if you've gotten 2 shots. But what's the other potential explanation? We can't think of one. We know the Prime Minister of Canada has decided, after thinking about it a lot, that vaccines just don't work. And we know that because he said it out loud.
First off, I mean, he can't be this stupid. He's really just ignoring it. I mean, we know that vaccinations, 95% effective, and there's some variants, but let's just 95% effective in keeping you out of the hospital and being ill, 90% from keeping you from getting COVID at all. But the fact of the matter is that's not 100%. And you need to get your community to reach a certain level of vaccination where all of these people walking around with 90% immunity begins to snuff out the spread of the vaccination. And I think why you would require people to wear masks, broadly speaking, is because you also want a message that it's not over, that you still need to be careful until we get to a point where deaths have gone below a certain amount. We still have, hundreds, if not, close to 1,000 people dying a day from this in this country. And so you do this until you're at, as a society, not just individuals having, some type of immunity, or otherwise you would have said to people who got COVID 6 months ago, you no longer have to wear a mask. It's the same theory. And he must know this. He's just out there basically promoting this notion that the vaccinations are for no reason whatsoever. It's
Alex Jones shit, really. Like
totally.
This idea, if they can make you wear a mask, they can control you. Like you are controlled. If you have to go to work in order to shelter yourself and feed yourself and provide the basics of necessity, folks, you are controlled. And it's just who's controlling you. It's not the people that want you to wear a mask. It's, this entire society that wants to exploit you.
There's an audience for this now on the right. I mean, and it's growing. It's why Trump didn't want people to know he got a shot before he left office.
Yeah.
The responsible thing to do would have been, hey, I mean, this was documented. This was his reasoning to appeal to the anti-vax crowd. And the reason Tucker isn't a dummy is because he recognizes that this is a new frontier for them, tapping into the growing conspiratorial thinking in different realms. The right was always conspiratorial, as we documented with the Boehner clip vis-a-vis Obama's birthplace. But this is going to be the new one. This is going to be the new area.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I don't think this is specifically Tucker Carlson taking the turn towards general anti-vaxxerism. Just more like Emma said, this is a new frontier for Republicans to carve out more of the population, and make them less and less capable of integrating with people who, are, I don't want to say science believing, but are more aligned with the general belief that vaccinations or that we have to live as a society. I think where he's getting purchased in people's heads is that there was, this implicit argument out there that once you got vaccinated personally, that you might be able to go back to quote unquote normal, whatever that looked like for you. And, that appealed to a lot of people. That was a sort of way it was sold, I think, had to be sold maybe to get people to get vaccinated at rates that we need to get them vaccinated at. But the unfortunate reality about that is that I think it leaves space for people like Tucker Carlson to enter into the conversation. Well, weren't you told that you could go back to normal? But you really weren't, though.
No,
that's the thing.
And we do have a situation now where the CDC says if you're in a room with a vaccinated person and you're vaccinated, you can go mask off. CDC is now saying that you can go and visit if your grandparents are vaccinated, you can take your kids to see them. I mean, we're not at normal now, of course, because there's still, and maybe it's just a left-wing plot in some way to basically have all these hundreds of people die a day from COVID. But the fact is, it's continuing on. I mean, in Michigan, you've got hospitals filling up so quickly that they're terrified. They're terrified there.
Yeah, no, I mean, the COVID is still ravaging the country. And I mean, I think if you were actually interested in like, keeping track of the way COVID's been ravaging the country and like the science overarching throughout the time, the idea that once you got vaccinated, that you would need to wait another 2 weeks or 3 weeks for that to be fully effective, that you wouldn't be able to start, eating indoors in max occupancy restaurants is not news to you. But I think that for the casual COVID news kind of reviewer, there was this go back to normal. We're going to go back to normal by Valentine's Day. We're going to open up movie theaters. We're going to do, X, Y, and Z. And so I think it was easier for a lot of people
Biden said specifically July 4th, right? I mean, he, and then they all took issue with that because he's talking, how dare you take the July 4th out of your mouth? So
it's warm now, Sam. It's warm outside. It's sunny now. People sort of, are matching the science to the way they want it to be, in terms of the way the weather is. And I think that it just so happens to overlap with a lot of cultural, underpinning issues that we have about individualism. So it becomes like, well, if I'm vaccinated, okay, I get that the community might be in danger, that the server might be in danger. But if I'm vaccinated, am I still in danger? And there is, I think, a layer of this too that Tucker Carlson's drawing on, that's like, well, we can't really say that you're not 100% in danger even if you're vaccinated. And so like, we have a relatively science illiterate culture that is still privy to a lot of like scientific information and data and like the veneer of science. So it becomes hard to necessarily parse out what's going on. So I can't necessarily blame people for thinking that things would go back to normal, however they were defining it, because that was the thing people were saying. And, it, unfortunately, like I said, it just creates room for people who are like anti-vaxxers or just looking to like, promote a personal brand that it's anti-vax adjacent to like come in there and go like, well, you see, they were lying. And it's like, well, no, not really.
But there is a certain amount when you're there is a difference between public health and personal health, right? I mean, in terms of the way you approach it, because on public health, it is not best for public health to come out and say that you're going to return to normal, even if it's the case that as the individual, you probably could go through your daily, you could walk down the street and not wear a mask and largely be protected. But from a public health perspective, if you are signifying in public that this is over, it's going to change the behavior of people around you. And this is the dilemma. And that's why it's actually like, there is a dilemma that is, I think, inescapable in the delta between public health and personal health and private health. And that is why it's so reprehensible for someone like Tucker Carlson, who has this type of audience, to exploit that, basically arbitrage that difference between personal health and public health, right? And that is what is so despicable and reprehensible about it, is that it is using a weakness that is inherent in living in a society and exploiting it.
Absolutely. And I mean, you see the same kind of thing in these sort of articles that come out about the individual people who have gotten vaccinated, but still contract COVID under some sort of like, freak conditions. And I think what makes those sorts of arguments, whether from, as explicitly reprehensible as Carlson's are, or just like hey, isn't this one guy getting COVID after getting the second dose 2 weeks later, like a thing that happened, is that because we have such a hard time with, just the idea of the public sector, people have a very skewed, are just incapable of having a healthy idea of what public health looks like. So it becomes, well, if getting the vaccine doesn't help me personally, how can it possibly be, the moral thing to do? Or like, how can I wear these masks? We just have a difficult conversation, I think, with the idea of the commons in this country. Yep. Strategically, it's been made very difficult. So the idea of public health just becomes a thing that is very hard to communicate to people, because it's like, well, yeah, get vaccinated, but like, what if it makes me sick? What if it doesn't help me? What if it's like, okay, well,
I think people like Tucker are the reason why they paused the J&J. I think there's a couple of reasons associated with why they paused the J&J, but the fact of the matter is that you have 1 out of a million people getting a blood clot. It is probably, we don't know. It's conceivable that it's a function of the vaccine. It's more likely it's a function of things like birth control or just coincidence. You have a 1 in 500,000 chance of getting struck by lightning, literally, versus a 1 in 1 million chance of getting a blood clot. If we even knew that it was causally associated with the vaccination, I'm convinced that part of the reason why they paused it was because it is a rear guard move, like protecting their flank essentially from people like Tucker, who are trying to find anything that would indicate this vaccine program is just sort of playing loose and fast with American lives. I mean, that is, and fortunately, I think that we have the supply of Pfizer and Moderna in most places, and I think we're moving into that era of like, now it's not a question of supply; it's more a question of demand, because there are people who I think are listening to Tucker and go like, well, this is, why else? If it doesn't make you safe, then they're just doing this to blankety blank, to control you or to put the 5G chip in you. But all right, let's take some IMs and get out of here. What a reprehensible it's just unbelievable. Married to Mothra. How many people got to support the show to ditch the ads? Maybe we could come up with a number, but
a lot.
Married Majority Report wardrobe coordinator. Hard to eat a bowl of Magic Spoon at the office when you only have a highlighter handy. Waka waka. I'm not going to lift a finger to prove I'm not racist. I'm not a puppet. I'm a free thinker. Don't forget to visit our sponsor, MyPillow, and use the promo code Hunter Biden Dominion. The Batico. May I point out American companies don't only dodge American taxes, but taxes in other countries too. Would be nice to have a minimum threshold internationally. Yes, I think there is going to be a minimum tax associated, and it will be a minimum tax. It won't be a maximum tax. Lee NYC, love Zirin. Please debunk the argument small colleges can't afford to pay athletes and can't afford to pay athletes in low-income sports. Well, I think you just make it associated with like what the revenue is.
It's a proportionality, and it's not hard to do.
Belkin Mike, Julian Edelman and Eli Manning are not Hall of Famers. I don't want to get into that.
I agree.
Molly
Julian Edelman, it's not even a conversation. It's not even a conversation. If Wes Welker isn't in, Julian Edelman isn't in. You know who has more receiving yards right now and hasn't played in like 3 years? Odell Beckham Jr. Jarvis Landry has more receiving yards. Please spare me with Julian Edelman.
What sport is this?
And also, he took PEDs. And I'm done with that. That's the dumbest conversation in sports right now. I can't get over it. Keep going. There we go.
All right, 5 more of these. Boston Bernie Bro, regarding Mindy's call, the general housing discussion, the volatile job market caused by COVID has created an unusual situation of low supply and somewhat low demand, but the demand is concentrated upwards on the wealth spectrum. The competition for the few homes on sale in most metro areas dominated by older people who can pay most or all in cash. A Square. Sam, such great interviews these last 2 weeks, and today with Zirin, tough break with the JJ vaccine. In defense of Mindy's arguments, the young and old PMC folks making between 100 and 300K do not necessarily view themselves in the top economic percentiles and live deadly afraid of losing jobs, homes, and retirement. This is why I think it's an important solidarity move to build bridges with this class. Rob from DTech. Well, I don't think the way to do it is, frankly, involving taxes as much
tax
as
policy.
Yeah. As much as it is like taking some things off the table that don't cost you anything, like healthcare.
Got to freak them out.
Rob from Dedham. Sorry if you already covered this, but you guys see Nancy Pelosi and her husband's Microsoft stock transaction? It's wild to me how blatant this is. The Banned Conflicted Trading Act appears to try and address this, but not likely to pass. Any hope to address Congress getting rich from just being in Congress? What amazes me about something like that, and I don't know the specifics, is just like, they're so freaking wealthy. Like, why would you just like say, like, you know what, we're going to take a pass on this?
I know. I had the same reaction. She's, over what? They have over 150 mil in the bank. Like, just chill out.
Like in your 80s, like, she's never going to spend that. Like, what? Like, why do you need to make that much money?
So you can give it to Christine Pelosi so she can create a dynasty. It's sick, but that's what it is.
It's sick. It's twisted. Salt Lake Sean. Almost 50% of police officers' deaths in 2020 were from COVID. We should designate COVID a terrorist organization and get the CIA to start hacking their nucleus facilities. Good one. All right. The final IM of the day. There we go. Bear at home too. Sam, I'm on my way to get my second Pfizer shot. Any recommendations to mitigate any potential symptoms? Plus, when will my chip be activated? Chip activation will be running through us. Just Tylenol, I think, was okay. That worked for me. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Brandon.
No, I love being here. I love being invited places. Thank you, Sam.
Emma, Matt, Brendan, good job today. See you folks tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid.